I am Kathleen Jeanette Guillaume Delamar, born and raised in Brooklyn, New York, in the Flatbush section. I had a stint of my early childhood in Montreal, in Montreal, Canada, and also a little bit in Haiti, specifically the Bel Air region of Port-au-Prince. But when I think of who I am, I most importantly am a child of God, the only daughter, of Fanm Potomitan herself, Kathleen Guillaume. I was raised in Brooklyn, New York, in the Flatbush section in a single parent household with my mother and my brother, my older brother, DJ Guillaume. While I am saying who I am, I know I wouldn't be who I am if it were not for the people who instilled all the values that I have and I follow. And I am also the proud granddaughter of Ghislaine Ducoste Guillaume, who is my dear, affectionate grandmother who just passed away. I called her Mommy Da. And most importantly, you heard me say my given government name is Kathleen Jeanette. Jeanette is my great grandmother's name, and I am so honored to be the only one in the family to carry her name, because out of everyone in the entire family, she's the one that exuded what a Fanm Potomitan should stand for. She was the very first social justice activist who was part of the largest labor organization in Haiti's history, called MOP, M-O-P, MOP, if I was to say it in Haitian Creole, Mouvement Ouvrier Paysan. And so when I think about all the things that she did for the community and I'm her namesake, I take pride in knowing that that's who I am. Oh my goodness, this journey for me started, I would say, since I was a child. But if I were to say when I was actually intentional about it, I would say about 28 years ago now. I consider myself, as a proud graduate of Howard University. I try my best to live up to its values, specifically to lead and embody excellence in truth and service. So in addition to being a relationship broker, I am what I would call a compassionate revolutionary. I am a disruptor, a servant leader trying to fight the good fight, a thorn to society's side as it pertains to their narrative of Black people, Haitian people, immigrants, women, poor people. For me, I always say that not all Haitian families are poor. We have kids who are in school. I was educated, and my being serves as a monument to Haitian Black immigrant excellence, and my being and deeds are an affirmation of my Blackness and Haitianness, if that's even a word. When I trace back how far I've been on this journey, I recall going to Canada and being at my aunt's house, my mother's sister's home. Her husband, my uncle Guillaume, is a Haitian Canadian artist, and he would have murals of paintings everywhere, and each of the paintings depicted either women in their beautiful light or the Haitian revolutionary heroes. And I always would question, what was going on here? What is this? Because as a dark-skinned young girl growing up and being Haitian and being in New York, I didn't hear about the beauty of women. I didn't hear about the beauty and the rich history of Haiti, except from what I saw in the arts from my uncle and from what my mother, who is what I consider an expert in oral tradition, would instill in me. So when I recall as a child, my mother attending protests, I remember I was a preteen, I was a teen at the time. They crossed the Brooklyn Bridge because at the time, the United States government dared to say that Haitians were the ones that brought AIDS into the country, horrific things that we as a Haitian community. So when I also saw the value in protesting, I was like, this is probably the path that I would go. And so when I saw my mother doing these things while at the same time instilling the lessons of my family's history, especially when it came down to the history of my great grandmother Jeanette, I knew that women can move mountains. So as a child, I used to always hear, "You're Jeanette's legacy, you're Jeanette." So I made it a point to make sure that if there were protests happening against my people, against Black people, against Haitian people, I would be a part of it. When you don't wake up being a Fanm Potomitan, you wake up realizing that all these females in your life instilled so many lessons in you, and it's your responsibility to pay homage to them by giving back to the community or the next generation the way they have. I am a community development social activist. I am a philanthropic fund development leader. I am a board member to several organizations doing amazing things internationally and in DC. I am a servant to the people who on June 14th became the very first Haitian American, Afro-Caribbean, Afro-Latina city council member in the city of Glenard in Maryland's history. And all of these things were guided, from my childhood. If you could kind of, go through that trajectory of being the kid who sat and saw her uncle's artwork and who was being told these stories by her mother to where I am today, I would say my journey started way back then. And professionally, my journey started almost 30 years ago. So that's a long response to how I got to where I'm at currently. For me, in a loud, chaotic world, I tend to gravitate towards the quiet and often dark spaces where whispers can be heard, right? Whispers of abused children, women, and so forth. Whispers of the poor, whispers of the marginalized, who all reside in the quiet places that I once occupied myself. So one of the difficulties for me is trying to fight the good fight by trying to respond to every need that I know I can't solve alone, but I can't stop not trying to help. As the first Haitian American, Afro-Caribbean, Afro-Latina in this role, I also feel the pressure of making sure that I lead by example and I don't let my people down. I, as someone who was formerly abused, someone who has been exposed firsthand to the crack cocaine epidemic, someone who has seen the pressures of being a first generation immigrant in this country. Shylon Lu, the burden is heavy, and all at the same time, trying to be present as a legislator to make sure that all these equitable things are happening, while I'm also focusing, again, in my role as a human whose family is either going through some travesty, if there's an earthquake, who is either being demonized because the government as a whole isn't appreciating what the value of being Haitian and Haitian people are, which is to be resilient and fierce and faithful and giving. So I have to wear all of these buckets. For me, the challenge is, the ultimate challenge is, because it is important for me to make sure that those who are whispering are seen, are welcomed, are heard, are felt, are valued. In my limited capacity, I've survived unpleasant experiences, but I refuse to play a part in anyone else's story of pain, of exclusion, of heartache. And so for me, I'd rather choose to listen to the whispers, because by the time we hear them yell and scream and shout, it's too late and we failed them. Oh my gosh, there are so many things that continue to inspire me. Isaiah 1:17. I am a child of history, but I always say that history starts with the good book. And I had some form of guidance to actually listen to the angels who are whispering as I walk. And so I am very intentional with my walk and my quiet time. So when I think of what inspires me, I immediately go to Isaiah 1:17, which teaches us, and I learned, I swear if I could tattoo this scripture on my body, I would. Isaiah 1:17 teaches us to learn to do good, seek justice, and correct oppression. Whose I am. I am a child of God. I have to make sure that whatever I do, it has to be coming from a place of non-malicious intent. And so when I try to guide my way through my inspiration of Isaiah 1:17, I open up doors and endless opportunities for others. I am inspired by looking at my daughter specifically, who is born of a Haitian American mother, an African American father. So she's 2 generations removed from being Haitian, yet and still everywhere she goes, she's like, I'm Haitian. I remember growing up, when I was her age, I was afraid to say I was Haitian at first because I saw how society was just so ugly and nasty. Susan B. Anthony, who once said that courage is the best protection that a woman can have, right? So my inspiration and my purpose has always been to elevate the Black and Haitian image by being an active participant, not a passive onlooker as it pertains to injustice, especially now when I am seeing the generation that's coming after me, looking at me as a role model. And I'm not just saying my daughter, who obviously she considers me a role model, and I take pride in that, but looking at her friends and other people who nominate me, to be awarded or to be honored. You know what? And I want all of the folks who are listening to my voice, and I'm saying folks because I'm not limiting this to women, okay? I want all of our sisters, all of our brothers to really realize what's going on, because as anyone who is a descendant of the Haitian blood, we know what the struggle has been. When we think about 3 to 5 years from now, I always think of I'm in survival mode because I'm a Haitian American. I have the Haitian blood rolling through my veins, right? I think one of the things that a lot of people for granted is, again, the word that I use is survival. A lot of people have an opportunity to live, and while they may be fighting racism or different other isms in the world, imagine that amplified because you are of Haitian descent. Imagine that being triple amplified because you are a woman of Haitian descent. Imagine that being quadruple amplified because you are of a darker shade, right? So now with all that being the reality, imagine being a politician. Okay, so I want to say that I never, ever, 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 ever wanted to become a politician. I tend to be a solutions-oriented person, so I am very civically engaged. But when it came down to running for office, I knew that politics was okay, it was here and there, but it's messy. It really, really, really is messy. But when you start realizing that you have to navigate waters and go across the aisle and work with people who you didn't even think you would be working with, it feels like I've been doing it for 7-8 years because that's how many war wounds I feel like I've received. I've heard people saying that, you should really continue on this path, right? Have you thought about the senatorial race? I was like, wait a minute. It's a very, 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 very sacrificial job. 3 to 5 years from now, I would hope that number one, should I run again, I see more equitable policies being implemented by myself and my colleagues. I think any and every one of my colleagues, those who get along, those who don't get along, those who ran against me, those who ran with me, they will all tell you that I am the person that I'm always about, but how about the citizens? How about the people? I would love to see my beautiful city become even more beautiful for all of the inhabitants. Well, if they are able to live in a city and pay the taxes in the city and own property in the city, they should be able to have a voice in who is representing them in the city. I happen to be the only immigrant or child of immigrant on the council. So I tend to, see all sides. You could circle back and interview me in 3 more years, that there's equitable policing and equitable practices throughout the entire city. But no matter how active I may appear to be in the forefront and in the limelight, I take pride in the things that I've done behind the scenes. As pillars of the community, you need to really pay attention to what's happening behind the scenes, right? I think by the time, that's why I mentioned the part about whispering and going to dark places, because people aren't going there, right? I choose to go there because I was the child who whispered and was just trying to hope for people to listen to me or hear me or even see me. I was the child who, was trying to wave and say, look, I'm beautiful. Am I not beautiful? And I was there all the while. I was, my own internal beauty was already there. When I think of the embodiment of what it means to be a Fanm Potomitan. It means someone who's courageous, who despite of or in addition to, they will continue to do what they feel is the right thing to do. So if I were to look at from the 4 segments of who I am, right? From a community development, philanthropic leader perspective, I've been in this field, again, I'm aging myself, but I've been in this field for almost 3 decades. I can honestly say that I have raised over $30 million for nonprofits, some who are serving Haiti specifically, some who are serving other parts of the country. Like I belong on a board called the Faith and Money Network. So I take pride in what I represent. I take pride in representing Recovery Cafe DC, which as a founding board member, I take pride in knowing that in addition or separate from the millions of dollars that I just mentioned about raising for the groups that I had worked for on the senior management level, like Jubilee Housing, Miriam's Kitchen, where I was the very first major gifts officer, and now as the director of the Center for Community Progress, also helped and led the efforts of a $60 million capital campaign for a nonprofit in DC that I was a senior management director of for almost 15 years. And what did that do? That created opportunities for a youth program to come into existence. That created a restorative justice reentry program. And that also created opportunities for affordable housing for people who look like us. For me, the role that I play as, while he may be Dr. DJ Guillaume to others, I'm his sister, and the role that I play in that role as a sister to my brother, the role that I play as a baby sister to my half sister, Fabienne, Dr. Fabienne Doucette, who's a Fanm Potomitan herself, who's making history, the role that I play intentionally as a daughter and a servant leader to my elders, the role that I play as a mother and a wife, I don't think anyone who comes around me wouldn't agree that I am the pillar in my household. To be a Fanm Potomitan, you have to lift people up, whether they're women or not. You have to intentionally be in a position to lift people up, tend to not look at ourselves while we're trying to save others. So I take pride in being that Fanm Potomitan that stops and focuses on herself and feeds her soul. My life mantra is literally what I said while I was being sworn in. And I had to give a speech for the city of Glen Arden's city council, which is, don't worry about getting it right all the time. As long as you always try to do right, and your intent is to get it right and it doesn't happen, it's okay. The other mantra is always try to move from a place of authenticity and integrity. It's very important to make sure that who you are and all the things that you do is in alignment. Values and your authenticity and your integrity, it should be universal. I would say the last words and some parting words that I would like to make sure is instilled in this interview is, whatever you do living in a capitalistic society, it's easy to let the money guide you and to be transactional. But there's nothing more powerful than to be transformational.